Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys are all well this morning. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for the Center for African Literary Studies Lecture 2025, which is hosted by University of KwaZulu-Natal Library Services Special Collections and is a Center for African Literary Studies. The theme for our lecture today is Prof. Bernard Linford's sterling contribution to African literacy studies. Folks, we've got a lovely program lined up for you this morning, and it gives me great pleasure right now to go ahead and welcome our Director for Library Services, Dr. Nhlanhla Ngobo. Now, just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Ngobo, Dr. Nhlanhla Ngobo is the Director of Library Services at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She holds a PhD in Information Studies and a master's degree in Information Studies from UKZN. Her library career started off at the eThekwini Metro Library, where she held various leadership roles. She has occupied academic library leadership positions for over 20 years. Nhlanhla is an active LIASA member, having served as the KZN branch chair-elect from 2014 until 2016 and branch chair from 2016 until 2018. Dr. Ngobo has also presented at national and international conferences on key LIS issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to hand over to the Director of Library Services KwaZulu-Natal, Dr. Nhlanhla Ngobo, to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pravesh. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of UKZN Library Services, I'd like to warmly welcome each and every one of you to the Center for African Literary Studies lecture. The Acting DVC for Research and Innovation, Professor Anil Chattergun, sent his apologies for not being with us this morning. His absence is due to a very pressing university commitment that he could unfortunately not get out of. And he has asked that on his behalf, I extend a special welcome to all of our distinguished guests, colleagues, and students. We are truly honored to have you with us in this lecture. This lecture series is dedicated to celebrating and reflecting on the lives, works, and legacies of great scholars and writers who have shaped African literary studies. It's an occasion not only to remember their immense contributions to literature, scholarship, and history, but also to reaffirm our responsibility to carry their vision forward. The Center for African Literary Studies, which is known as CALS for short, was established to preserve, showcase, and promote the richness of African literature. It houses invaluable collections of manuscripts, personal papers, letters, journals, and rare works from some of Africa's most prolific writers and scholars. This center serves as a space where researchers, students, and the wider community can engage deeply with Africa's literary heritage and its continuing relevance in shaping our understanding of the past, present, and future. In this spirit, today's lecture begins, In this spirit, today's lecture brings us together to celebrate the enduring power of African literature to speak to social justice, identity, history, and human dignity. The Center for African Literary Studies lecture is therefore more than an academic event. It's a commemoration, a gathering of minds, and a reaffirmation of our shared commitment to advancing African literary scholarship. We are especially grateful to all of those who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event possible, and to our keynote speaker and our respondent, who will guide us through today's important reflections. I have no doubt that you will find this lecture inspiring, thought-provoking, and deeply enriching. enjoy the CALS lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngobot. Folks, thank you very much indeed. And as Dr. Ngobot has said, that we're very fortunate today to have our keynote speaker, that's Dr. Professor Malaba, and we've got Dr. M. Keys, who's going to do the respondents. But before we get to our keynote speaker, we would like now to share with you a little video that gives you an introduction on the CALS, as Notlantla spoke, all right? So thank you very much indeed, colleagues. We are going ahead right now to go ahead and have a look at our CALS video. Thank you.
The Center for African Literary Studies, or CALS, is an integral part of the University of KwaZulu-Natal's, or UKZN's, vision to become the premier university of African scholarship. Established in 2004, CALS was created to house the Bernd Lintford's collection, a key archive in African literature. In 2005, CALS received formal recognition as a significant UKZN initiative, with former Vice-Chancellor Professor M.W. Makgoba describing it as a unique collection of African literature in the world. CALS plays a vital role in the study and appreciation of African literature. It holds one of the most comprehensive collections in the field, with over 16,000 books, journals, and rare sound and video materials. Notably, the collection includes a full archive of Onitsha market literature from Nigeria, offering an invaluable glimpse into Nigerian literary culture. In addition, CALS boasts popular literature from Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi, with early works from authors such as Cyprian Ekwenzi. The collection also includes the Richard Priebe collection, which enriches the holdings of Nigerian and Ghanaian market literature. Among CALS treasures are original letters from African authors, offering a unique personal insight into the literary world. Key collections housed at CALS include the Gillian Stead Eilison collection on Bessie Head, the Bernd Lintford's documents, the Catherine Wober collection on early Black South African autobiography, and the Gerald Moser Lusophone collection, to name a few. CALS launched the Shata and Shooter isiZulu Literary Museum, further solidifying its commitment to promoting African languages and cultures. The museum's collection has garnered strong support from UKZN students who increasingly recognize the importance of local language literature. CALS' mission is to be a center of excellence for research in African literature studies. It aims to develop, disseminate, and apply its expertise in African literature to a global audience. The center is expanding its focus to include literature in other African languages, such as Lusophone and Francophone works, establishing itself as a leading resource for the study of African literature in all its forms. CALS envisions developing African studies into an interdisciplinary program, supporting UKZN's goal of becoming the university of first choice in African studies. By prioritizing African studies, CALS helps position UKZN as the foremost institution for such studies, with CALS as its defining feature. With its extensive collection and commitment to African literary scholarship, CALS is at the forefront of preserving and promoting African literature. The center invites scholars, students, and the broader public to explore its resources and engage with its mission. Join us at CALS to discover the rich history of African literature, contribute to ongoing research, and help shape the future of African literary studies. Your involvement supports our efforts to make African literature accessible to the world.
Great, folks. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, that's a great introduction to our CALS, the Center of African Literacy. And folks, if you want to actually go and visit us, you're welcome to come and have a look at that and look at the CALS. You're welcome to come and visit us at CALS, and it is great that we got the gentleman that you've seen there is a very important component of CALS, okay? And that's Mr. Wiseman Masango, and he's a very welcoming for you to go there and see him and visit us there. You can just go to the university's website, the library services, and get contact details. So, folks, now it actually gives me great pleasure indeed to introduce to you someone who I have got great respect for, and he's been absolutely a great contributor to UKZN and to CALS and the special collections for library service, and that's none other than Professor Malaba. Now, Prof has made significant scholarly contributions across 4 key areas, and that is the study of Shakan literature, critical analysis of Charles Ngoshi's work, pioneering research on Namibian poetry written in English, and stories of Macquarie Pollen's major novels. Prof's work is grounded in contextual literary analysis, examining text as products of specific historical periods and as reflective of authors' responses to the defining issues of the times. Professor Malaba was appointed as administrator of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize from 1995 until 1996 by the Commonwealth Foundation. Prof has long played a role in promoting African literature on global platforms. He also served as coordinator of the British Council's Pan-African World Words Project in 2010, working closely with the Council's representatives in Zimbabwe and Namibia. From 1992 to 1994, Professor Malaba was Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Zimbabwe. Over his 37 years academic career at universities across the sub-region, Prof. Malaba has remained committed to secondary education, notably through his involvement with the English Association in Harare, which organized lectures on set text to support high school teachers. He also served as the acting director for the Center of African Literary Studies at CALS from July to 2010, right? And that's when I had a very close relationship with Prof. Prof. Malaba has also been a respected external examiner at institutions including the University of Swaziland, the Polytechnic of Namibia, University of Stellenbosch, University of Johannesburg, and University of Botswana. Prof. Malaba has delivered invited lectures at numerous international universities, which included the University of Hull, that's in Boston University, University of Düsseldorf, Ohio State University, University of Florida, Washington State University, University of Oviedo, University of Pretoria, University of Mississippi, the RWTH Aachen University, and the University of Essex. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Prof right now, who is actually going to go ahead and address you. Professor Malaba, thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Sukram, for that generous introduction. I think the best thing probably is for me, before getting into the lecture itself, is to give people signposts as to the authors that I will be discussing. There are specific links between these authors, but I thought that if I give you a roadmap, because we're looking at Bernd Lindfor's contribution to African literature, therefore it's important that we give you a sense of the scope of the material and things that he has studied. The first author I will discuss is Thomas Mafolo, and the second one will be Thomas Mafolo's Chaka. The second will be Chinua Achebe's A Man of the People. The third will be looking at what he'd written about Peter Abrams' A Wreath for Udomo, and the fourth would be looking at Dennis Brutus's poetry. And then in conclusion, I will speak a little about the short story, since Burns' work covers many genres and focus particularly on drum. Right, thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this address pays tribute to one of the leading figures in the study of African literatures, Professor Bernd Lindfors, who was born in Sweden in 1938. He graduated from the Northwestern University and Harvard University. He later joined the staff of the University of Texas in Austin and rose to the rank of Professor of English and African Literature. He is one of the co-founders of the prestigious Research in African Literatures Journal, widely regarded as the premier journal in the field. He has published numerous articles and books, edited many valuable bibliographical compilations such as the Black African Literature in English, 1982 to 86, Black African Literature in English, 1987 to 1991, and Black African Literature in English, 1992 to 1996, to name but a few. He has also published early Black South African writing in English, from which I will draw for some of my examples, and that was published in 2011. And he co-edited with Lynn Innes the valuable volume Critical Perspectives on Chinua Achebe in 1978. Now, the purpose of this lecture is to highlight some of his contributions as a scholar, his mastery of close reading of texts, coupled with his deep-rooted understanding of the historical context that shaped the lives of the authors and the societies that nurtured them. Now, a 30-minute address does not purport to cover all aspects of his work, but seeks to illustrate some elements of his style with reference to Thomas Mafolo, Chinua Achebe, and Dennis Brutus. The core of the Center of African Literary Studies collection at the University of KwaZulu-Natal is anchored around his personal set of books that were purchased and then form the main body of works at the center. Various other material, as was referred to by Dr. Sukram and Dr. Ngobo, various other academics donated books. Some had offered their collections to the university, and the university bought them. And then, of course, you've had donations from various sectors, and the video told us a lot about the other collections that are available there. Now, Burns also sends regularly books to the center, and he has done so for decades. His generosity reflects his gratitude to the continent that has inspired his professional life. I first met Burns soon after I graduated at the University of Zimbabwe, probably, I think, in 1981. If my memory serves me well, he delivered a lecture on early Black entertainment abroad. Burns' interest spans all the major genres: fiction, poetry, drama, orature, and folklore. He admires the brilliant way in which Thomas Mafolo portrays Shaka in his historical novel. And I will quote, "Indeed, the great strength of the book is its confused theology, its inability to reconcile the Christian and African dogmas that Mafolo embraces with equal fervor. At one level, the book is a pious Christian tract illustrating the consequences of yielding to temptation and choosing evil instead of good. At another, it is exactly what one member of the Moria Sesotho Book Depot's Publications Committee deemed it, quote, an apology for pagan superstitions, end of quote. And in that sense, the missionary carried on saying, quote, an evil book, even though admirable from the literary point of view, end of quote. The real mystery about Shaka is not how or why it was published, but how or why it works so well as a didactic narrative despite its internal metaphysical contradictions. The quotation foregrounds Burns' awareness of the hybrid cultural contexts that exist in various African texts. He critiques and societies they arise from. Another example related to that of Mafolo is his analysis of the centrality of Chinua Achebe's utilization of proverbs in A Man of the People, found in his essay, The Palm Oil with Which Achebe's Words Are Eaten. And again I will quote, thus, in A Man of the People, as in Achebe's other works, proverbs are used to sound and reiterate major themes, to sharpen characterization, to clarify conflict, and to focus on the values of the society Achebe is portraying. By studying the proverbs in a novel, we gain insight into the moral issues with which that novel deals, because they provide a grammar of values by which the actions of characters can be measured and evaluated. Proverbs help us to understand and to interpret Achebe's novels. In other words, the proverbs are not just decorative elements, they are embedded in the message conveyed by the novel. Now, A Man of the People is one of his most famous works, right? Chinua Achebe, as you're well aware, I'm sure, is seen in many respects as the father of the African novel, and he, for many years, was one of the editors of the Heinemann collection at the African Writers series. Now, Man of the People was published shortly after the coup that toppled the government in Nigeria in 1966. Many reviewers suggested that it was a prophetic novel, but in his essay, Achebe's African Parable, Linforth challenges that assumption, and through his forensic analysis of the events leading up to the coup, vis-à-vis the meticulous record of the sequence of activities leading up to the publication of the novel, Linforth's research reveals that the evaluation process preceded long before the evaluation process was initiated long before the coup occurred. Hence, and I quote, to interpret the military coup in A Man of the People as a prophecy is to suggest that Achebe meant the novel to relate only to Nigeria. This, I think, is a mistake. While it is evident that the novel owes much to what Achebe observed in his own country, many of the events described had happened and were happening in other independent African countries. By ending with a coup, an event anticipated yet still unknown in Nigeria but familiar elsewhere in Africa, Achebe added a dimension of universality to his story. It was not merely a satire on Nigeria, but a satire on the rest of the independent Africa as well. If the coup had a special meaning for Nigeria in the mid-60s, it also contained a relevant moral for other emerging African nations racked by internal upheavals. The coup was an African parable, not a Nigerian prophecy. Now, the ending of A Man of the People reveals that Achebe has a proper sense of contemporary African history. People say that history repeats itself, and people have pointed out the cycle or circle of coups and counter coups, particularly in Nigeria. And it looks, if we consider the world as it is now, that that cycle is starting up all over again, or is well entrenched, I should say. Now, the other novel that I want to have a look at is Peter Abrams' A Wreath for Udomo, which one can rightly describe as a prophetic work. It was published in 1956, and Ghana gained its independence in 1957. It was the first independent country or country in Africa to become an independent nation, from the Gold Coast to Ghana. And the novel reveals the stark choices African nationalist leaders make once they gain power, and these are movingly presented. Faced with the choice of doing what is best for his country rather than support the revolutionary struggle in Pluralia, a neighboring state still ruled by whites, Udomo was seen by many to have betrayed his former comrades in arms, and his My Nation First, familiar resonance with America First in our context nowadays, his betrayal of his erstwhile comrades leads to his death. The cost in personal terms for heads of governments and for ex-combatants on our continent is taxing. The women in Udomo's life also suffer, but I digress. The challenge of living in exile features prominently in the text, and Udomo, the anti-hero, I would argue, of A Wreath for Udomo, spent much of his time in exile. Right? The prison graduate phenomenon is fairly common in independent African countries, where by virtue of having been imprisoned for challenging the colonial establishment, many African leaders have ended up getting into power, and tragically, many of them want to rule as absolute monarchs. Udomo faces that challenge, and in A Man of the People, of course, we have Chief the Honorable Dr. M.A. Nanga, who is one of the biggest criminal leaders that fiction has brought forth. And Achebe's critique of him is really very striking and pertinent. And he, in many respects, uses proverbs to show how many devious politicians actually incriminate themselves by putting their own hopes and aspirations above those of the nations. The issue of social justice is, again, I would say, a common problem in our society today. Now, in the fact that Peter Abrams, who was one of the founding Black writers in South Africa, in the end left and went to England. And there, whilst in England, he wanted to bring about racial harmony. And then subsequently, of course, he went to Jamaica, but we'll come back to that. The challenges of living in exile feature prominently in the text. Burns' analysis focuses on Abraham's shifting perspectives on the issues of race and the fact of exile from his native land had on him. He left South Africa in 1931, fed up with the discrimination he faced. He spent 2 years at sea, a powerful symbol of rootlessness, before settling in England. He was commissioned to write a book on the lives of people in Jamaica, sponsored ironically by the Colonial Office in 1955. Soon after he returned to England, he decided to relocate with his family in Jamaica. In 1996, however, 10 years afterwards, or 11 years afterwards, he wrote This Island Now, which was published, and the racial issues that he thought he had escaped when he was leaving South Africa, he in the end found there after he was living in Jamaica for some time. So that the Caribbean island was not what it seemed at first sight. And this signaled the fact that issues of racial discrimination are endemic. One could, if one thinks of the migrant crisis that we are experiencing the world over, think that actually we, rather than having defeated apartheid, you could make an argument that there is a globalization of apartheid and discrimination. He then finally wrote an epic novel, The View from Koyaba, which collapsed, I think, under the weight of its own ambition. And this is the argument that Bernd Lindfors propounds. Because it is far too ambitious, ladies and gentlemen. It's covering 150 years, encompassing the Caribbean, North America, and tropical Africa. And the conclusion is devastatingly ironic, because rather than wanting to promote the multiracial society or diverse society that he had previously aspired towards, he basically concludes that novel by recommending that Black folk should separate themselves entirely from Western influence, a form, you could argue, of apartheid in reverse. You'll forgive me if I croak a bit. It's allergy season for me. So the critic, Bernd Lindfors, always anchors his works and his criticism in the lived reality of the writers and the situations that they find themselves. And the exile motif, which is there in A Wreath for Udomo, comes up also in Dennis Brutus's poetry. Now, Dennis Brutus, the South African poet, he spent some time in southern Rhodesia where he got shot at one stage. And but he's South African, and his love for South Africa is immense. He is a very accomplished poet. And Bernd Lindfors, again, ladies and gentlemen, I take you back to the text that he writes, because he has a tremendous sense of humor, has been. And I quote, speaking about Brutus's first anthology, Dennis Brutus's first book of poems, Siren's Knuckles Boots, 1963, contained a variety of lyric forms invested with many of the standard poetic conventions. These were neatly demarcated stanzas, end rhymes, assonance, alliteration, bookish allusions, carefully balanced contrasts, paradoxes, skillful reiterations and refrains that enlarge rather than merely repeated an idea, well-reasoned arguments couched in logically connected images, and utterances so rich in symbolic suggestiveness that they spoke at several levels of significance simultaneously. There were no loose ends in this poetry, no wasted words, no compromises with the reader's dull-wittedness. This was highbrow poetry, tight-mannered, formal, and sometimes formidably difficult. Schooled in Shakespeare, Donne, Browning, Hopkins, Eliot, and other classic English poets of exceptional intellect, Brutus attempted to write poems that would challenge the mind, poems sufficiently subtle and intricate to interest any well-educated lover of poetry. It was during this period that he wrote nearly all of his most complex verse. The title of the anthology, Sirens, Knuckles, Boots, has a sinister resonance. It symbolizes the setting, which is Transkei, the area which was designated as the first Bantustan to be established in South Africa. The anthology is a gift for teaching students the main aspects of canonical English poetry, as long, of course, as they are brilliant.
Now, I'm sorry to disturb you. It's Pravesh here. Prof, can you please turn on your video for us to have a look at?
I don't have a video.
You don't have a video. You got your screen
I
on your
mentioned
screen.
that. Yes,
Okay.
no, this is a desktop. I did.
Okay, my
inform
apologies.
people
Please
at
go
the
ahead.
beginning.
Thank you. Apologies
Okay.
to disturb you. Thank you.
No, that's fine. As I was saying, the title of the anthology, Sirens, Knuckles, Boots, is one that foregrounds the brutality of the apartheid state. Dennis Brutus was imprisoned between 1964 and 1965. He spent 5 months in solitary confinement, and during this period he decided to radically change his style should he write again. In 1968, Letters to Martha and Other Poems from a South African Prison was published. And again, one wants to cite Bernd Lindforce's insightful critique of this anthology. The change in idiom was immediately apparent. The diction was far simpler. Rigid poetic devices such as end rhyme, metrical regularity, and symmetrical stanza structure had been all but abandoned. Conceits, tortuously logical paradoxes, and tantalizingly ambiguous image clusters could no longer be found. Ornaments of virtually every kind had vanished almost entirely. The result was a flat, conversational mode of poetry that surprised and in some cases alarmed readers who admired the technical complexity of the poems in his first volume and expected the same in his second. Now, instead of saying 3 things at once, Brutus was saying one thing at a time and saying it very directly. He was creating poetry of plain statement, a poetry which bus drivers, porters, and cleaning women could understand and presumably appreciate. End of quote. So although the transformation is sudden and obvious, it is not absolute. The well-rounded statements did occur. His poetry can be divided into 3 phases. Right? The first phase was the complex erudite ones. Then after a spell in prison, he decided to focus on poetry that would appeal, he thought, to the ordinary man in the street and woman in the street. In July 1966, Brutus left South Africa on an exit permit, which did not allow him to return. He spent 4 years in London doing anti-apartheid work. He campaigned rigorously as a very keen cricket player, but he also wanted South Africa thrown out of cricket competitions because of apartheid. So for 4 years, he was a very active anti-apartheid campaigner before he moved to America. There he taught as professor of English at Northwestern University. Then he spent a year as a visiting professor at the University of Texas in Austin from 1974 to 75, and he was chairman of the Africana Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. Lindfors refers to the 4 phases of Brutus's poetry as complex, simplicity, balance, and economy. Economy is an even leaner version of balance, the last being an extreme form of balance, as I've just said. Lindfors equates this with the Hegelian triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, the last being a balance between thesis and antithesis. So although he's started off with writing very erudite poems, towards the end of his career, he was writing very simple poems, wanting to communicate his message directly to the people. Art, if you like, being used to help conscientize people of the environment in which he lived. The 2 major thematic aspects of his early exile poetry are, firstly, his awareness of personal freedom and mobility that he gained whilst others who had remained in South Africa were confined and suffered. And secondly, his recognition of what he has lost in leaving his country or his beloved homeland and his restless travel abroad. Nostalgia is a characteristic feature of some of these poems. So you can see how leaving the motherland hurt him, but gave him freedom. And so the later poems particularly celebrate freedom, because after spending time in solitary confinement, freedom, the freedom of choice to go where you like, to do what you want, was very precious to him. But there is almost a residual guilt of abandoning the people back home. And there is a similar tension, but the direction that they take is so different in his case than that of Peter Abrams that I referred to before. In 1973, he was invited to China and read a translation of Mao Zedong's poetry, which is characterized by classical simplicity, and then his later poems were much longer, but people were debating whether they are poetic, right? And one of the challenges, of course, if one looks at some of the modern poetry, you can ask the question, if you're a classical English teacher, are these really poems, or are they prose chopped up to look like verse? Now, the injustice experienced by Black people is a recurrent motif in his protest poems, such as those depicting the conditions in prison. I will conclude by looking at the short story. Now, the short story is a very popular medium in Africa, in African literature generally. And in South Africa, many of the writers wanted to write, and most of them chose to write in English. And they managed to get published in various journals, if they were more academically inclined. And there were also the magazines. And I will look at drum because its history is both fascinating, ironic, and quite comic in some respects, or tragicomic, perhaps I should say. Right. Turning to the short story in South Africa, the title of Bernd Lindvo's chapter in early Black South African writing is The Short Happy Life of the South African Short Story. Now, this is ironic, but it sums up the plight of this genre in a local context. In our end is our beginning. The struggle it took for Thomas Mofolo's Chaka to be published, 15 to 16 years, was because of censorship, where one missionary or the panel said, no, it's a wonderful work of art, but because we don't agree with the theological or traditional religious practices or spiritual practices and customs, we mustn't publish it. Right at the beginning, Mofolo, whose book was written in 1909, which was the first book written in Sesotho, but then it took 15 years, in a sense, to get it published. In South Africa, as apartheid was being entrenched, it became more and more difficult for serious black writers. Now, some people might question the serious, but serious black writers often came across barriers when they challenged the state. But there were other avenues for expression. Right? Since submissions to the mission presses were judged based on their conformity with the creeds of the publishers, right? Apart from printing Bibles and hymn books, the missions focused on the school textbooks. The short story writer relied on magazines or various competitions to get published. Their stories were filtered in terms of expectations, the expectations of the publishers, and more rigorously when bodies like the Publications Control Board were established. African Drum was started in 1951 as, and I quote, a magazine of Africa and Africans. The target market was, I quote, 150 million Bantu and Negro inhabitants of the continent whom we will attempt to reach for the first time in history with words which will express their thoughts, their impulses, their endeavors, and ultimately their souls. The white proprietor and the white editors selected articles on tribal history, tribal music, famous chiefs, farming, religion, and sports. One reader dismissed their selection and insisted on this. Give us jazz and film stars, man. We want Duke Ellington, Satchmo, and hot dames. Yes, brother, anything American. You can cut out this junk about crawls and folktales and Basutus in blankets. Forget it. You're trying to keep us backwards. That's what. Now, within a year, drum was transformed, or the African drum, as it was transformed to drum. And pretty girls started appearing on its covers, and drum sales rose up quickly. The fiction changed as there were stories about city life, not about rural life. There were love stories, gangster stories, boxing stories, serialized detective thrillers, and true confessions. In 1952, Drum started to sponsor an annual short story competition with a first prize of £50. In its peak year, 1957, 1,638 contestants submitted manuscripts. A new editor came in 1958 for 3 years who was intent on turning it into a picture magazine. He did not last long, and in 1962, only fewer than 200 entries were submitted. Now, the more serious writers turned to other magazines like Zonk and Our Africa. Ezekiel Mpahlele, famous South African writer and critic, he was an editor for a time before he left, I think, to go to Nigeria or to go to West Africa. He tried to persuade the publishers to publish stories with some weight, but they weren't interested, right? Cash is king. The market knows best. The examples cited above reveal Bernd Lindfor's keen sense of humor. English was a chosen language because English was the language of sophistication. It was the language which showed that you were educated, and it was the language which showed that you had a potential market beyond your own linguistic group. Right? Now, I've highlighted the comic, or you could say tragic comic elements of the short story. But if you think about the titles that I saw, or the themes that I referred to earlier, you can see how deeply entrenched the culture of violence, because of the tolerance of violence. The stories were bloodthirsty. One features a woman who takes an axe and actually cuts her philandering boyfriend's neck, and she leaves with the blood stain spattered all over her. But this regular diet of violence, I think, helps fuel our current pandemic of gender-based violence. It is shocking that nowadays one is hardly shocked to find that 8 people have been shot overnight. Literature speaks to and reflects the society that is being dealt with. The writers are often perceived as the voices of the voiceless. And in this survey of aspects of Bernd Lindfor's critical engagement with African literature, I've tried to highlight some of the key aspects that we need to consider. Now, Michael Chapman has got a book of the very good stories from Drum. And so it's not that all of them were tacky, pseudo-American, violent gangster pop thing items like that. In conclusion then, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a privilege to shine the spotlight on some examples of Bernd Lindfor's sterling contributions to the study of African literature. He is a lodestar in my or our profession. I was fortunate to meet him at the start of my career. We subsequently met at a number of international conferences. His humility and charm are remarkable. I cherish our friendship and the insights that I have gained from his works. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Prof. Malaba, and it's greatly appreciated, folks. I think we are very privileged to be part of this talk this morning. And Prof, thank you very much. And at UKZN, we are very fortunate as well to have the Birth Infos collection housed at CALS. So you're welcome to contact us and make an appointment to go ahead and have a look at or you need it for any research. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I would like to welcome, acknowledge Prince Nandi Zulu, who was the doctor of the late King Goodwill Zwelithini, who has joined our webinar as well. Ladies and gentlemen, as per my introduction, we were due to have a respondent in Dr. Mkhize. Unfortunately, Dr. Mkhize has got something urgent that has come up and she could not join us. Instead, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Cornelius, who is going to go ahead and do the respondent for the talk by Professor Malaba. And Dr. Cornelius is a lecturer at the English Studies Department of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, based at the Howard College campus. And his PhD thesis was on the post-colonial nostalgia and meaning in the selection of South African writings that included a study of novels by Morgaine Wallis Serote, Etienne van Heerden, Riyad Jacobs, and Ronnie Govender. And folks, Dr. Cornelius' interest in teaching and his interest is in the slave narrative, in post-colonial literature, and in post-colonial eco-criticism. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure now just to hand over to Dr. Cornelius right here, who's joining us for this webinar. Dr. Cornelius, can I ask you to please go ahead and turn on your video and join us. Thank you very much indeed for taking time to be with us.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Professor Malaba, and to everybody present this morning. And thank you for letting me step in for Dr. Mkhize. As you know,
we do appreciate you coming in, ma'am. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, she had to step away, unfortunately, but it was my good fortune because I was then able to listen to Professor Malaba's paper. So thank you very much for that, Professor Malaba. It's been very interesting and for telling us about Bernd Lindfor's work. As I understand, we have 5, maybe 10 minutes for questions and for comments talking about your paper.
Yes, that's correct, Doctor. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anybody wants to jump in just yet. I'm not sure I have specific questions, but there were just a few things that piqued my interest as you talked. One of the things was about the archive of Bernd Lindfor's writing. Were you saying that there is a collection of his writing at the Center for African Literary Studies? And I did want to comment also, yesterday, the Poetry Africa Festival is on at the moment. And yesterday we had the poet Kwame Dawes come and talk to the English Studies Department at Howard College. And he was talking about exactly this, about writing for the record, for posterity, and archiving things, and just how important it is, just writing of people who write literature and also people who write about literature. So that stood out for me. That was very nice to listen to that yesterday and then listen to you speak today.
Can I answer, or do you want to go to your second point? Yes, the core collection is based on a lot of his material, because what he did is he set up a trust to say that given that a lot of his work was on Africa, he wanted his own personal collection to come to Africa. He used to come to the University of Natal, certainly, and perhaps they also came with the merger. He used to have some sessions jointly at times with Professor Stephen Gray, who was at UJ, and they had these gatherings here in Maritzburg where basically there was a discussion of a range of literary issues. So he's done that, but I think Wiseman can tell you, but almost every year I think he sends 2 or 3 boxes of books. And one year he was quite annoyed. I think it was during COVID where the books were sent back to America and then he had to send them back to South Africa because I don't know whether the post office was on strike or people weren't collecting material. So
Yes,
yes,
Prof. I actually
that is
called
there.
it as well. It was a bit embarrassing for us. Yeah, but unfortunately, that's what happened.
Also, you said something early on when in your paper you were talking about, and I'm not sure at which point it was, I've just got it jotted
Yes.
down, but you talked about hybrid cultural contents and I think contexts
Yes.
of African writing. And
Yeah.
that stood out if you just do a quick search of all the books and
Well,
all the writers that he's studied.
oh, yes, it's wonderful because hybridity is at the core. And if you look at the fact that in colonial situations, the colonized live in their own little world, but they have to operate
Yes.
with the colonial existence. So that it's not surprising to find Africans who say that they are Christians, but they also carry on practicing their traditional religious practices. And the irony, of course, is Thomas Mafolo was a very intelligent man, and he plays the system by pointing out that Africans are caught up in this 2 or even more frames. So hybridity is at the core. And if one looks at Leopold Sedar Senghor's wonderful poetry, I think he's one of the finest poets, but I gather he's not fashionable nowadays. But he's also has a sense of hybridity because although he is a staunch Catholic, he also believes in the traditional structure. So again, it's up to you. Where do you draw the line between syncretism and apostasy? And this is a recurrent motif in African literature.
Okay, I think we'll welcome questions from the audience. I'm not sure if a hand goes up, if I can see it on this webinar, if people are able to unmute and speak, or are we taking questions in the chat?
Dr. Cornelius, anyone can actually just come in and have a conversation according to what they
Okay.
want. That's not a problem. And yeah, I think it might be a problem to acknowledge people's hands up. I think just unmute and speak. And
Yes.
and obviously you won't talk over anyone else, but just unmute and have a chat, and we could have this discussion this way, I suggest. Thank you.
Yes. So please go ahead. Anybody who'd like to comment here?
Yes, for me, Prof. Malaba, you spoke about the Drum magazine, and I do have recollections of that when it's there. And I was at the Bessie Head Library well years ago, and you know that they are legal deposit library, and one of the legal deposit libraries in South Africa. So you could get copies of that if you just want to go and do any research as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that point, if I can just add, Rachel Mateo Macha wrote a fascinating book, Real and Imagined Readers, Censorship, Publishing and Reading Under Apartheid, which is absolutely fascinating. Because if you look at the things that were banned, right? And there's one humorous story told of the special branch raiding a setup or a business, and they confiscated stuff saying that this wasn't aloud, but whilst they were waiting to be picked up by their friends, they were busy reading these girly magazines with great attentiveness. Yeah, so
Yes.
such the duality of the block people, and yet, as I was saying, writing, African identity was shaped principally initially by the literary representations. And then, of course, as more and more people got more and more highly qualified, Africanist historiography grew. Thanks.
Yeah, I think censorship is a very important topic at the moment. Again, the talk by Kwame Dawes yesterday, he's based, I think, in Rhode Island in the States, and he was talking about censorship of books in the States, and also how people maybe can't speak as freely as they would like. So these authors that are studied and the critique that we have of their work, it's very important to see that, and to see that work going on with current writers, I think.
Indeed.
I think, yeah, just at the moment we're seeing how all over the world freedom of speech is being curtailed, and literature then can put things into words in different ways. Could you comment on that and the importance of literature for telling the truth obliquely, maybe?
Yes, well, I think so. Because for me, literature, for people who haven't had the opportunity to travel, literature liberates people's imaginations so that they can actually understand other societies. And as you're alluding to it, spaces being confined. I mean, if you look at the war in Gaza, that the high casualties that journalists have
Yes.
suffered because
Yes.
people are silencing voices that they don't like. Now, in that context, I think it's important for writers to write in order to give their perspective. I'll never forget when I was in Namibia and I was teaching Tess of the D'Urbervilles to a packed class. There must have been 100 or something there. They were never so silent as when I was teaching that book, because I think for them to realize that there's also in other societies that the unwed mother faces stigma and persecution, and that resonated with them. And I think that if literature often gives us a writer's perspective on what it means to be human. And I think more than ever, we need the emphasis of our common humanity to be proudly and proudly and valiantly defended.
Yes.
And so I think that that is the role of the writer. And of course, Chinua Achebe, the role of the writer in a new nation, and all of those people who are saying that this is the situation and this is our response. Because, of course, our task as lecturers, as teachers, is to interpret. And I think one of the joys of literature is that people can come up with their own interpretations so long as they're based on a sound textual analysis, which is what I tried to do by citing from Bernd Lindfors's work.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Any further comments?
Yes, I think if Pam, is there anything on the chat list for any comments, please?
Pravesh, no, there's no questions on the chat.
Mm.
Thank you very much. Thanks, ma'am. Dr. Cornelius, is there anything else you want to add, or can we move on?
I think we can move on. I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you very much to Professor Malaba, and thank you to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for your to come in at such short notice, ma'am. I greatly appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to come to the end of our presentation, but I would like now to call upon Mr. Thiru Munsami, who is the manuscript librarian at the Gandhi Lutuli Documentation Center, to actually move the vote of thanks. Thiru has been quite long involved in the library, and he's been at a medical school for 11 years, and well, he's been 11 years in this post here, but he's been a loyal servant for UKZN Library Services. Thiru, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sukram. As we bring the closing remarks for the 2025 Center for African Literary Lecture, I would like to express gratitude to all contributors and attendees. First and foremost, thank you to the keynote speaker, Professor Mbongini Malamba. First, for his insight, reflections on Professor Bernard Linsford, and contributions to the African literacy studies, and also the respondent, Dr. Cornelius, for her thoughtful engagements. I'd like to also extend our and acknowledge Her Royal Highness Princess Nandi Zulu KwaZulu-Natal for attending and joining us for this for the Center of African Literacy lecture. And appreciation goes out. Appreciation is extended to the university executive, the faculties, the staff, the students, and the guests for participation and support. We would also like to wish and acknowledge those who worked behind the scenes in the logistics and the coordination and the technical support for this lecture. A special thanks goes to the director of the UKZN Library Services, Dr. Nuslan Kobu, the portfolio head of special collections, Dr. Roshni Patel, and the portfolio head of the circulation, Dr. Pravesh Sukram, and also Ms. Pamela Adams from our corporate relations department. I'd like to also give a thanks to the special collections team, Ms. Namasile Zuma, Mr. Wiseman Masangu, and Ms. Shireen Latif. They received particular recognition for their dedication in coordination for this lecture. On behalf of us, I would like to thank you once again for being part of this meaningful occasion. We look forward to welcoming you to future lectures and events. May you have a pleasant week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Thiru. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you very much for taking time to join us for this webinar. We greatly appreciate it, and warm thanks again to Professor Malaba and Dr. Cornelius. Folks, from all of us at UKZN Library Services Special Collections, thank you very much indeed, and we do appreciate you being present with us today. Have a good day and a good week.